Alrighty, so I've got a working working model. Let's take a look at what's involved here. There's really four pieces. We've got a Raspberry Pi here. This is the 3B plus, I think. Ultimately, I'm going to move it over to this guy, which is a Raspberry Pi Zero W. Only because you can see it's a much smaller footprint. It's a little bit lower cost, but functionality-wise, same functionality. But for the moment, I'm working off of the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, I think is what it is. The second piece is what's called a breadboard. So this is what actually allows me to build out a functional circuit, or a circuit board, if you will, without actually putting it in, into a circuit, silicone circuit. So I've got 4 individual channels that I've set up here, each of which connect to the Raspberry Pi, but also connect to the third component, which is a relay switch. This is basically like a light switch, right? This particular board has 4 switches on it. I'm able to, because of the connections to the Raspberry Pi over here, I'm able to turn on or turn off a switch as I see fit. And what happens is when you turn on the switch, it applies current. In this case, what I have is the current flowing out of here, out of one station or one switch into one of these sensors, and then that is flowing back into my breadboard. And then that actually is being monitored by yet another connection to the Pi. So I've got 4 stations wired. I only have 2 stations wired with respect to actually having sensors on them so that I could test it out. Didn't seem to be necessary to have all 4. I mean, I can test it out with 1, really. I didn't even need 2. And then the fourth piece is actually the software. So let me boot up the Raspberry Pi. So you boot that by applying the power to it via the USB, and you can see that it is now booting. That is Linux that is booting up. Give it a second. It doesn't take particularly long to boot. The surprising thing with this is, again, it's a computer, right? This thing right here is a computer, full up computer. Same thing with this thing here. All right, so I'm going to log into my Pi. Okay, so now we're logged in. So now what I'm going to do, let me pull up my code. And this is written in Python. And this is a very basic program. It allows me to initialize the board, initialize things, and set things up, and actually monitor the status of a couple of the stations. So let me get out of here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to launch that program. And you'll actually be able to see, oh, that should not have come on. That's interesting. I'll have to take a look at why that actually came on there. Yeah, what the heck? All right, well, I'll fix that. But I'm going to launch this, which will initialize everything. You'll probably be able to hear actually the thing turn, so to speak, turn on. So you may or may not have heard it click. We now have both green lights on. The lights are there, nothing more than a visual indicator for me. Both of these red lights are on. That tells me that I have turned on this one and I've turned on this one. So I now have current flowing into this guy, and I have current flowing into this guy here. So what happens is I'm actually actively monitoring the current flow, not the actual amount of current, but whether there is current or not that's flowing through there. And at the end of the day, what that allows me to do is monitor a station, if you will, station or a sensor or a set of sensors. In traditional alarm language, those would be called a zone. Here, my goal is to be able to set it up so that you could have literally every window or every door on its own quote-unquote zone, though I'll refer to them as stations, or likely as stations. So you can see here, you just have a string of guard 1 and guard 2. So I'm referring to when I'm monitoring a station that's actually being monitored by a guard, right? So I have a guard that's monitoring one station, and I have a guard that's monitoring another station. And both their statuses are 1, as you can see there. A status of 1 basically means that I'm seeing current, right? So I'm seeing what I'm expecting to see. So I guess if you think of it as a guard in a watchtower, that guard's perhaps sitting on his butt reading the newspaper. So let's give him something to do. So I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to open the window at station 2 that guard 2 is actually watching. So when I do this, you'll see that green light goes off, and you'll actually see on the screen over there some information pop up. So let me separate that. So the green light is off. You can now see that on the particular channel I'm monitoring, I went into a 0 mode. Now my guard 2 status is now 0. That is an open situation, right? So let me reconnect that. You can see, interestingly enough, right, because these are magnetic, you can see that I don't have to put them completely together, but close enough, and that green light will turn on, and you'll see that I noticed in the code, I caught that event. Let me do that again. So I'll pull it off. We're noticing that via the monitoring. We'll pull it back on. We notice that it's now back on, right? So we've gone from an open to a closed state. Whether or not that actually was going to produce an alarm really comes down to whether or not that particular station was in alarmed mode, right? If that guard was supposed to do something when it saw that something happened. So we can do the same thing here for the guard at station 1. I'll separate it. You'll see that the green light went off. You can see up here that we've recognized that we saw a change at station 1. You can see that station 1's status is now showing as 0, which equates to there's an issue with that at that station, right? So guard 1, if he or she were told to be in alarmed mode, right, alert mode, do something, then there would have been something that would have been done from there. Now, obviously, here all I've got in the programming now is simply monitoring the state. A fair bit of work to do to actually enable it to say, okay, I've seen a state change. What do I do with it? And then what is it actually that it does with that? So let me reconnect this now. You can see that the green light came back on. We noticed that the state changed again, and we're back to 1. Now, if you take this, mock-up here, and you put this into a situation where you have a house that has 60 windows or 60 windows and doors, right, you would have the ability potentially to monitor each of those individually, and you would basically have a guard, quote unquote, stationed at each one of those stations watching it. And you could, in an app on a smartphone, see the status of each station, right? The guard is going to report to you what the status is at its station. And if you have it set up so that station is in alarmed mode, then it would send a signal basically to the server in the cloud, so to speak, saying that this station is in alarm mode. This guard is now in alarmed mode, and then obviously some action would take place from there. Number one, you could think that notification would flow down to the smartphone or the smartphone app for each user who belongs on that account, right? They would see that. And you could, as well, take that and connect it on the back end to an alarm monitoring company if you wanted to, and they'd be able to see that, hey, we have an alarm. The other thing about this is a lot of flexibility with what can be done. You could set it up so that the system doesn't have to be either in all in alarm mode or all in not alarmed mode. You could have only some stations and only some guards be in alarmed mode. For example, I think about my house where I've got a couple of bedrooms that we really don't go into unless we have guests here, and we've got a couple of rooms where we really almost never open the windows or we never go through those doors. Maybe I would want to set it up so that is always in alarm mode, and then have it set up so that on a geoconferencing situation or geofencing situation, so that if I leave the house, then the alarm, all of the stations go into alarm mode. Or you have a situation where only some of the stations go into alarm mode. So a lot of things, a lot of flexibility that can be done because, again, the logic for it is being moved into a standard microprocessor, which runs Linux, which can be programmed, right? There can be logic put behind it. So It's really taking a hardware logic, which you'll find in the control panel of today's traditional wired electronic control panels, and moving that out. The connectivity is still fundamentally the same, right? You've got current going out to sensors. And those things are being monitored at a control